Hi, I'm Esme. I gave 30 years to a company that called me family. Then one day, my name vanished from the campaign I built. My boss laughed when I resigned, said I should try begging at that age. And my own sister? She told people I was just the one who filed reports. At our family dinner, they toasted everyone, except me. But what they didn't see was the day I bought back everything they tried to erase. Now tell me, have you ever been cut out so quietly you almost believed you weren't supposed to exist at all? But the humiliation didn't stop at the office doors. It followed me all the way home. I don't remember the drive from Sterling Pacific to my house, and that alone should have frightened me more than it did. I sat in the driveway for several minutes after parking, both hands on the wheel, staring ahead like the ignition was still running. The car was off. My hands just hadn't caught up to my brain yet. I'd been dismissed before, clients rejecting proposals, a budget pulled, promotions passed over, but never erased, never reduced to a ghost in my own project, my own legacy. Support role, the agenda had said. Not lead, not architect, not even coordinator. Just support, like I was there to fetch water. Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. I had always kept it that way. Minimal decor, clean countertops, no ticking clocks. It felt intentional, once. Today, it felt like my life had been vacuum sealed. I dropped my keys on the hallway table and kicked off my shoes without bothering to straighten them. There was no one to scold me for it, no one to notice. The phone buzzed again, same work group thread. "We're looping in Brielle on the pitch draft." I stared at the screen, heart dry. I could still reply, I still had access, but something inside me had switched off hours ago. I powered down the phone completely and tossed it into the drawer beside the couch. I sat in silence. No TV, no music, just the faint hum of the fridge and the weight of a 30-year career sitting in the middle of my living room like a collapsed structure. Later that evening, I did something I hadn't done in over 20 years. I called my sister. Callista answered on the third ring, her voice bright like she'd just stepped off a stage. "Esme, well, this is a surprise." I skipped pleasantries. "Are you hosting dinner this weekend?" "Of course, same as every month." "Why, are you thinking of finally showing up?" Her words landed with that familiar veneer of teasing, a tone I'd grown used to since childhood. "Yeah," I said. "I think I will." "Wonderful. I'll let Mom know. Maybe you can even help set the table this time," she added with a short laugh. I didn't laugh back. "I'll bring wine." The call ended quickly, but not before I heard her mutter under her breath, probably thinking I'd already hung up. "Guess she's got time now." The next 2 days passed in a strange haze. I went for walks but didn't remember the paths. I organized a few drawers, shredded old receipts, and sat with a mug of coffee that cooled before I remembered to drink it. The act of doing nothing wore heavier than work ever had. Then came Friday evening. Dinner at Callista's house was always a spectacle. Her home was designed to be photographed, light oak floors, perfectly placed throw pillows, candles lit, not for scent, but for symmetry. Everyone arrived early except for me. I came exactly on time, which in our family was as good as late. "Esme!" My mother's voice rang out as I walked in. She air-kissed my cheek like she hadn't just missed the last 3 calls I made over the past year. "You look rested," she said, eyes scanning my outfit like she was appraising it for resale. "Thanks, Mom." "Just left the office." That was a lie, a soft one, but she didn't ask what I meant. Callista appeared from the kitchen, apron pristine, wine glass in hand. "Esme," she greeted, name clipped short like I was a colleague she barely tolerated. "Glad you could join. We saved you a seat, right between the thermostat and the kids' table. I smiled. Perfect. I've always preferred the temperature controls. The meal began with the usual fanfare, Mom complimenting Callista's roasted vegetables like they'd been sourced from Versailles, Callista deflecting with false humility, and everyone pretending they hadn't heard the exact same banter last month. No one asked me about work. No one asked me anything at all, really. At some point between the main course and dessert, Mom launched into a toast. "To the Darnell girls," she said, raising her glass. Callista, who just got her latest feature in Portland Monthly, and Esme, who, well, always keeps us grounded. I looked around the table. No one flinched. Callista smirked into her wine. My nephew whispered something to his sister that made her giggle. Grounded. That was the word she chose. Not accomplished, not brilliant, not even hardworking, just grounded. Like a power line after a storm. I swallowed my reply with the rest of my wine. Then came the moment that snapped it all. Callista reached for another pour and said, loud enough for the whole table, "Remember when Esme used to tag along on my PR shoots? She was always so quiet. Still is, like our little intern." Everyone laughed. Even Mom. Even the kids. I didn't. I pushed back my chair and stood. "Excuse me," I said. "I need some air." No one followed me. Outside, the night was cold and sharp. I walked to my car without looking back. Inside, I sat for a long moment, keys in hand, heart thudding. Back home, I opened my email out of habit, and there it was. An internal chain from earlier that day. One I wasn't supposed to be copied on. One where Brielle had replied to Orland's latest memo with, "Just let her talk. No one listens anyway." I didn't react, didn't cry. I printed it, folded it once, and slid it into a folder marked Return Plan. The first time they erased me was not today, just the latest. The wound was older, quieter, like a faded bruise no one remembers how you got, only that it still aches when pressed. Saturday came with gray skies and the kind of drizzle Portland's known for, soft enough to skip the umbrella, heavy enough to dampen your mood. I stood in front of my closet longer than I should have, staring at cardigans and blouses I hadn't touched since before the promotion that never came. Eventually, I settled on a simple navy sweater and dark jeans, not dressed up, not dressed down, just presentable enough to be ignored properly. By the time I pulled into Callista's driveway, the cul-de-sac was already full. Every other car was lined up perfectly, as if posing for a real estate flyer. I parked half a block down and walked under the mossy maple trees, counting my steps, bracing myself with each one. Inside, the smell of roasted rosemary chicken hit me first. Then came the sound of laughter, Callista's trademark cackle, sharp as crystal. I walked in without knocking. She always insisted the family door stay unlocked during monthly gatherings, though somehow I was the only one who still had to let herself in. "Oh, look who showed up," she said the moment I stepped into view. "Esme's here, everyone." The announcement was met with polite murmurs and a few nods. My mother barely turned from her seat at the end of the dining table. "Sit, dear. We've just started." I took the only open chair, furthest from the head of the table, wedged between the thermostat and the baby high chair. No one looked twice. Plates clinked, dishes passed. The conversation circled Callista's latest feature on the city's local news channel. Apparently, her boutique PR firm had secured a segment on modern women in business. My mother beamed like Callista had won a congressional seat. "They asked me about work-life balance," she said, twirling her fork like a baton. "I told them, if you want something done right, give it to a woman who's already running everything." "You always were the organized one," Mom chimed in, not missing a beat. "Even as a girl, you had your binders and plans." Esme? Well, she always liked to observe. Observe? Callista laughed. Mom, come on. She was quiet. Still is. Someone at the other end snorted. I didn't bother checking who. Then she said it, like it was nothing. Esme's always been good with numbers and background stuff. You know, the support role, the same phrase from the agenda sheet at work. I smiled, thinly. Glad I could be useful. Callista took it as praise. See? Always dependable. I excused myself before dessert. Claimed a headache. No one insisted I stay. The drizzle had turned into steady rain by the time I got home. I dropped my purse on the kitchen counter and poured a glass of water, hands trembling in a way that irritated me. Not from sadness, from restraint. I wasn't sad. I was done being sad. I was something else now, like a wire pulled too tight for too long, humming just before it snaps. Still holding the glass, I walked into my office and sat in front of the computer. Just a quick check, I told myself, just to see what I'd missed. The email was there, time-stamped during dinner, from Brielle, sent to Orlan, CC'd to the new operations assistant. Just let her talk. No one listens anyway. 10 words. That's all it took. I leaned back in my chair, eyes locked on the screen. My fingers hovered above the keyboard. I could reply. I could copy the entire leadership chain. I could forward it to HR, to legal, to the board. Instead, I opened the printer drawer, slid in paper, and hit print. The sheet emerged quietly. White, warm, damning. I didn't cry. I placed it in the same folder as my resignation copy and labeled it with a Sharpie. Evidence. No rage, no panic, just documentation. I made tea, sat on the couch, let the rain tap against the windows. They don't see you, my mother once said when I was 12, after a school play where I stood in the back row, dressed as a tree. But that's okay. Trees are steady, trees last. I believed her for years. Now, I'm not so sure I want to be the tree anymore. I didn't sleep much after printing that email. The message looped through my thoughts, not for what it said, but for how unsurprising it was. The truth was, I'd heard it before, not always in words that plain, but in tones, glances, the way doors closed just before I reached them. By mid-morning, I needed space, mental space, emotional space, whatever kind would let me breathe without clenching my jaw. I pulled on a scarf, grabbed my coat, and drove toward the east side of town where the traffic slowed and the coffee shops still felt human. There was a spot I hadn't visited in a while, tucked beside an old bookstore that still used handwritten signs, Maple Grind. It used to be my landing place after big presentations, somewhere I could unwind with a hot drink and scribble out ideas on legal pads. The place hadn't changed much. Still the same tin ceiling, amber lighting, and cinnamon hanging in the air. I ordered a medium black coffee, no room, just the way I used to, and found my old corner table miraculously free. I slid into the wooden chair like it remembered me. Across from me, a couple in their 30s were arguing in hushed tones about vacation plans. Behind me, a group of college kids were laughing over something on a laptop. And me. I pulled out my journal and stared at a blank page, unsure which version of me would be writing. The sound of pages flipping pulled me out of my haze. Someone had left a business magazine on the edge of the community shelf. I recognized the cover photo from across the cafe, one of Sterling's signature campaigns, the one I had developed from scratch. I picked it up and scanned the contents until I found the spread. 4 pages, glowing coverage, quotes about innovation, disruption, bold strategy. There were images I had selected, copy I had rewritten at 2 a.m., data visualizations I'd personally built in Excel after everyone else went home, and the name under lead strategist? Brielle Knox. I didn't curse. I didn't cry. I laughed, once, short and hollow, then closed the magazine and placed it back exactly where I found it. I didn't want to keep it. I just wanted to make sure someone else might open it one day and assume the world worked the way the article said it did. I left the cafe without finishing my coffee. Driving back, I passed the hotel downtown that Sterling used for its annual galas, and like some twisted reflex, a memory surfaced, the previous year's event. They told me I would be honored for 25 years of service. I even bought a new dress. Not flashy, just something that made me feel polished. I arrived early, thinking someone might need help setting up. I wasn't listed on the seating chart. My badge said senior staff. No title, no department. I found a place near the back wall, behind the centerpieces. The room filled. People buzzed about the campaign results. My campaign, though no one called it that out loud. Orlin got up to speak midway through the night, glass in hand. And now, he'd said, smiling that practiced smile, please help me welcome the new face of innovation here at Sterling Pacific, Brielle Knox. The applause was immediate. People stood. I didn't. Brielle looked radiant, young. She took the mic and thanked everyone who trusted me to lead. Her voice never cracked. Not once did she turn toward the back of the room. I left before dessert. After that night, I stopped celebrating work anniversaries. There was nothing left to mark. Back in the present, I sat on the edge of my bed and pulled out my journal. I flipped to a fresh page and, for once, didn't try to make it neat. It's not ambition they took from me. It's the right to be remembered. I wrote it slow, one line. Pressed the pen until the ink thickened. No embellishments, no qualifiers. They didn't forget me, they erased me. That's different. I closed the book and placed it on my nightstand, beside the folder that now held 2 sheets, my resignation letter and Brielle's email. This wasn't the first time they tried to erase me, but this time I wouldn't let them close the book without my name on it. They thought I was done, but I was finally starting. Sunday morning was overcast again, but not in a way that made me want to stay in bed. I brewed my coffee, black and strong, and checked the small, square calendar pinned to the fridge. Today was Ivy's winter recital, something I'd been meaning to attend for years but always skipped in favor of client deadlines or pitch decks that never had my name on them anyway. I arrived 10 minutes early and stood in the back of the elementary school gym, careful not to take a parent's reserved seat. The kids were lined up in front of a makeshift curtain, all nerves and glittery bows, strumming plastic ukuleles and singing winter-themed songs that weren't quite in tune. But it didn't matter. My niece stood front and center, tiny and focused. When her group's song ended, she didn't wave at anyone like the others did. She just smiled, eyes scanning the crowd until they found mine. The corner of her mouth lifted the way her mother's never did. After the recital, the crowd spilled into the hall, parents with phones out, grandparents handing out candy. Ivy found me before I found her. "Aunt Esme," she beamed, "you came." I knelt a little so we were face to face. "Of course I did. You were amazing." She looked shy all of a sudden, playing with the edge of her sleeve. "My teacher said I shouldn't sing so softly, that people wouldn't hear me." I paused. "What did you say?" She tilted her head. "I told her what you told me, that being quiet doesn't mean being invisible." My breath caught, just for a second. "You remember that?" "Yeah. You said it when you helped me with that volcano project last year. I didn't forget." She ran off to her friends, and I stayed crouched a moment longer, pretending to fix the strap of my purse while something heavy shifted in my chest. On the drive home, Orlin called. I recognized the number, but let it ring twice before answering. My voice was calm, too calm. "Esme," he began, as if we'd spoken just yesterday. "I heard you've been talking to some of our former clients. Just wanted to reach out personally, see how you're doing, and, well, we were wondering if you'd consider coming back as a consultant. We're restructuring, and frankly, you've always had a mind for transitions." I didn't interrupt. I let him finish his polite little pitch like it was some kind of favor. He ended with, "We can make it flexible for your schedule, of course. You wouldn't need to rejoin the full team." I waited one full beat, then replied, "That opportunity expired, with my respect." Click. I hung up before he could say anything else. I didn't feel triumphant, just clean, like brushing out the last tangle in your hair before bed. By afternoon, I had all my old campaign notes spread across the kitchen table. I flipped through binders, tabs still color-coded, some of the pages coffee-stained from nights I stayed up finishing decks while everyone else had left the office. I made a list. Contacts, vendors, former clients. I knew who still respected me and who had only shaken my hand because Orland told them to. I could tell the difference now. I opened a fresh folder and labeled it, Return Plan. Then I pulled out the binder labeled Sterling FY19 Q3 and began scanning every signature line I never got to sign. Margot came by the next day. She brought shortbread cookies and chamomile tea and walked into the house like she'd never left the company either. "I saw the feature in Portland Monthly," she said, flopping onto my couch. "They used Brielle's photo, again." I shrugged. "Of course they did." Margot leaned in, voice low. "They're building their whole image on borrowed ideas, Esme, and we just let them." "Not anymore," I said, handing her a copy of the folder I'd started. She opened it slowly, scanned a few pages, and then looked up. "You're not just planning a return, you're building an alternative. I'm building what should have existed in the first place." She didn't nod like people do out of politeness. She smiled. "You're going to finish what the rest of us couldn't." We toasted with lukewarm tea, not to vengeance, but to vision. There was no fire in my belly, no screaming hunger to destroy what had been done to me, just this quiet, undeniable certainty. I wasn't here to get back in. I was here to build something they couldn't touch. If they needed a fight to remember me, I was finally ready to give them one. I started that Monday like any other. Early coffee, a quiet house, and a to-do list handwritten on a yellow notepad. Except this time, I wasn't writing down meetings or pitch outlines. I was listing names, real names, the ones who had been there when it mattered, not just when things looked good on paper. I opened the storage cabinet next to my old desk, searching for the flash drive I hadn't touched since my last major rollout at Sterling. It took me a few minutes to sort through the tangle of cords, old tax files, and a birthday card from a niece I barely saw. When I finally found it, I slid it into my laptop and opened the last version of the FY21 campaign file. That's when I noticed the email chain at the bottom of the folder. It was a forwarded thread I didn't remember seeing before. Sent by mistake, I guessed. Curiosity took over. I clicked. The message opened to a proposal, an external licensing deal for the campaign I had built. The design, the branding, even the client list, all detailed in a draft agreement dated 2 weeks before I turned in my resignation. My name wasn't anywhere in the document, not once. No developed by, no contributor, nothing. They hadn't waited for me to leave. They just moved forward like I was never part of it. I stared at the screen, the words blurring slightly, but I didn't feel surprise, not anymore. This was just the receipt. By midday, I found myself pacing in front of my bank building, rehearsing what I'd say. Inside, the air smelled faintly of copier toner and the citrus cleaner they used on the lobby floor. My advisor, Chris, was a polite man in his 40s who looked like he never lost sleep. He greeted me with the usual cheer, not sensing the shift. I need to withdraw a portion of my retirement, I said plainly after we sat. Chris blinked. You, sure? That's your cushion, Esme. You're not even close to distribution age yet. I'm not doing this for comfort, I said. I'm doing it for control. He didn't argue. He simply nodded, tapped some keys, and asked for verification. By the time I left, I had the funds moved into a temporary business account and a fresh sense of resolve I hadn't felt in years. Back home, I cleared the dining table and spread out every folder labeled Sterling in my cabinet. Contracts, campaign decks, performance reports. I wasn't just planning a comeback, I was constructing a counterattack. The next few days moved like a wind picking up speed. I called former clients, carefully selected ones, people who had seen me stay late, clean up messes, pull deliverables out of thin air. I didn't ask for favors. I asked them if they remembered who did the work. Most of them did. A few even laughed, saying, "Of course I knew Brielle wasn't the one behind that pitch. You were the brain. She was the hair." I called an old friend from law school, Gina. She'd gone into corporate compliance and owed me for helping her polish a presentation during her divorce. Within 48 hours, she sent me a sample operating agreement for an LLC with notes on how to acquire minority shares without triggering the board's alarms. Margot dropped by on Wednesday morning with a grocery bag full of pastries and a spreadsheet. She'd spent the night building a stakeholder map of Sterling Pacific based on publicly available data. "We don't need to buy the whole thing," she said, pointing at the column highlighted in green. "We just need enough to make them listen." I looked at the screen, then back at her. "And you're doing this with me?" Margot leaned back, her gaze steady. "We've both had enough of being nice." That night, I sat at my desk and stared at the wall. The post-it I'd stuck there weeks ago was curling slightly at the edge. In neat black ink, it still read, "They said I was too late." "What if I'm right on time?" I pressed it flat again with my finger. Then I picked up a new sticky note, pulled the cap off a pen, and wrote, "Let's begin." I stuck it directly below the first, and for the first time in years, my reflection in the mirror behind the desk didn't look tired, it looked sharp. They called it silence. I called it preparation. They called it stepping aside. I called it stepping back. For momentum. The cost of staying quiet had finally become too high. By Thursday morning, I was no longer just building momentum. I was ready to push. Margot and I had finalized the paperwork. The shell company, under a deliberately unassuming name, had acquired enough shares to secure a minority block with voting leverage. It wasn't flashy, but it was enough to get us into the room, and that's all I needed. The letter went out that afternoon. Quiet, direct, and legally binding. "Effective immediately," it read, "we will not be renewing the executive contract of Mr. Orland McCrae." It was delivered by certified courier to Sterling Pacific's headquarters and carbon copied to every board member, legal counsel, and investor who mattered. I didn't wait for a reply. That evening, I ironed a navy blouse I hadn't worn since my last on-site client pitch. I paired it with a charcoal blazer and pants I'd almost donated the year before, back when I thought moving on meant shrinking back. The next morning, I arrived at Sterling's building 15 minutes early for the quarterly board review. No one noticed me at first. I moved through the lobby like I always had, unseen, efficient, already carrying the weight of the day before it began. I stepped into the glass conference room just as the last chair was being adjusted. There was a hum of small talk, a few chuckles, the old boys' club still in full swing. Orland was at the far end, sipping coffee like he had nothing to fear. He didn't see me. The chairperson cleared her throat and tapped a silver pen on her tablet. "We'll begin shortly. Please note, there's been a revision to today's facilitation." Orland leaned forward, puzzled. I wasn't made aware of that. A voice from the corner, an assistant I didn't recognize, spoke clearly. Today's meeting will be led by our new executive partner. All heads turned. I stepped forward. Silence fell like a stone dropped in water. Orland's face froze mid-expression, as if his jaw hadn't caught up with his brain. "Esme?" he finally said, not in recognition, but in confusion, then panic. "I believe you've seen the notice," I replied, tone even. He started to rise, moving toward the chair at the center of the table, his usual spot, polished by habit. The assistant stepped between us and gestured toward the opposite side of the room. "That seat," she said softly but firmly, "is for the new owner." He stopped, mid-stride, hand still in the air. It was the same way I had once stood frozen, when he'd praised Brielle in front of a room full of executives, when he'd shrugged off my resignation like it was overdue paperwork. Now it was his turn to feel it, the moment when the room goes cold, not because someone shouted, but because someone showed up with facts and fire instead of noise. I walked past him, pulled the chair back, and sat down without flinching. The rest of the meeting moved quickly. Margot, sitting behind me, passed me the key talking points when needed. I outlined our position, I listed priorities, I redirected attention towards sustainability, staff retention, and client trust. Words they hadn't heard in years. Orlan didn't speak again. Not one word. He sat there, smaller than I remembered. There was no applause when I adjourned the meeting. No one stood, no one rushed to congratulate me, and I didn't need them to. That silence, the one that used to cut into my spine like a dull knife, was now mine. It wasn't empty anymore. It was a border, a boundary, a statement. I gathered my notes, nodded once, and left the room. In the elevator down, a younger associate I barely knew turned to me and whispered, "They never saw it coming." I smiled faintly. That's because they never saw me at all. The doors opened. I stepped out into a city that hadn't changed, but I had. But even power doesn't protect you when the truth finally speaks. One name down. One legacy reclaimed, but there was still one truth left to face. After the boardroom turned cold and quiet, I didn't celebrate. No champagne, no calls to old mentors, no victory laps around the building. Instead, I returned to the office I had claimed, sat at the newly cleaned desk, and opened a file labeled Restoration. Sterling Pacific had built its entire public identity on a wall, a literal one. A long stretch of hallway just past reception, lined with portraits of former executives, award-winning campaign leaders, and culture builders. My photo had once been there too, tucked modestly between a retired COO and a founding partner. It wasn't big and it wasn't centered, but it was mine. When I walked past that wall the morning after the vote, my photo was gone. In its place, a glossy corporate poster, 5 hands stacked together, the phrase "Values in Action" floating above in sans serif bold. I stood there for at least a minute, not out of shock, but out of the sheer absurdity of it. Like someone had slapped a motivational sticker over a headstone. I didn't say anything. I pulled out my phone, snapped a picture, and texted it to our design team with 4 words. Put it back, correctly. No emojis, no exclamation point. They didn't reply, but I knew they got the message. I watched one of them flinch at their desk as the notification popped up. The rest of the week moved in fast beats. I reviewed every department. The audit trail in HR revealed just how deep the rot had spread. One-sided terminations, unexplained demotions, deleted internal evaluations. I didn't call anyone out publicly. That wasn't the point. I initiated quiet exits and started quiet interviews. The ones who stayed would rebuild. The ones who left had already done enough damage. And then came Friday. The annual end-of-year address was scheduled for 3:00 p.m. in the largest conference hall on the 17th floor. It had always been Orland's stage. He'd strut onto the platform with rehearsed charisma, dropping phrases like scalable synergy and lean legacy as if he'd invented them. Most of the staff endured it for the free cookies and paid time off. This year, I let the event unfold exactly as planned. Same agenda, same seating, same media team, except for one small change. At 3:12 p.m., the lights dimmed and the projection screen came to life. I stayed off stage, standing just behind the curtain with Margot and one of our new partners. My heart didn't race. My hands were steady. The screen played a reel of Sterling's biggest campaign moments over the last decade. Flashy images, clients grinning, logos morphing into taglines, the kind of highlight reel agencies show off at awards dinners. Then the names began to appear, one by one. Team leads, art directors, analysts. Then a pause, black screen, a single line in white text. Campaign architect, Esme Darnell, 2010-2023. No voiceover, no applause prompt. Silence, followed by a single clap, then another, and another. I heard Brielle's breath catch from somewhere in the third row. She didn't look at me, but her chin dropped just slightly. That was enough. I walked on stage as the final slide faded into a soft Sterling logo. No music, no spotlight, just the room and me. I looked out at the sea of people who had once forgotten me and said, without flinching, "I'm not here for applause, I'm here for accuracy." Then I turned and walked off. No bow, no smile, just a woman reclaiming her name in full view of everyone who once pretended they didn't know it. The curtain didn't fall behind me, it rose. They gave me silence. I gave them legacy. And now, it was time to step outside. The next morning, I was making tea when I saw her through the kitchen window. Vera, my mother. Standing at the bottom of the porch steps, wearing that pale blue coat she reserved for funerals or visits to the bank, occasions that required a stiff spine and pressed lapels. I didn't rush to the door. Instead, I let the kettle finish, poured myself a mug, then opened the screen slowly. "You didn't call," I said. "I didn't need to," she replied, stepping inside before being invited. "I figured you'd be home." She moved through the living room like she still owned the space, glancing at furniture she'd once called a little too plain. When she saw the campaign photos framed on the far wall, her face tightened, but not in disapproval, something closer to recognition. "I came to give you this." She handed me a sealed envelope, thick and cream-colored. I turned it over without opening. "Estate updates," she said, with the subtle sharpness of someone who's already prepared for backlash. "Callista's name was removed. You're listed now as the legacy coordinator of the family's holdings, of your father's trust." I blinked. What happened? Vera looked me straight in the eye. "You made people look again. That's more than we've ever managed." She didn't stay for coffee. No hug goodbye, just that envelope, and a sentence that felt heavier than it sounded. By mid-afternoon, I needed air. I walked downtown to clear my head and stopped by the corner bookstore near Alder. They kept a decent rotation of local press and niche business magazines. I hadn't planned to go in, but a bright orange cover in the window caught my eye. The title read, "The Woman Who Rebuilt from Silence." I stepped closer. It was my face, not airbrushed, not posed, just me, sitting in the park, holding a pen mid-sentence, taken, I assumed, by someone during my interview 2 weeks ago. A journalist from a local magazine had reached out after the Sterling restructuring became public. I agreed to speak, thinking it might land on page 7. It was the cover. Inside, the article was simple, honest. It outlined the campaigns I'd led, the years I'd gone uncredited, the quiet revolution that followed. It didn't sensationalize, it didn't exaggerate. It told the truth plainly, and people seemed to be reading it. At the register, the clerk raised his brow. "She's getting a lot of attention." "Good piece." I smiled faintly. "She's earned it." I bought 3 copies. Later that night, I was going through emails when a new message popped into my inbox. Subject line, "I owe you." I didn't recognize the sender right away, but the moment I opened it, I remembered. Nina. She'd been in operations, mid-level, always polite, always quiet in meetings. We'd worked side by side for nearly a decade. The email was short. "I saw it all. Every time they talked over you. Every time your deck ended up under someone else's name. I stayed quiet. I was afraid. You deserved better. I'm sorry." I stared at the screen for a long time, not out of anger, but because I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear it. I typed back, "Thank you for saying it. That means more than you know." Then I turned off the light in the office, left my laptop open, and poured myself a glass of wine. It wasn't about headlines, or applause, or revenge. It was about that moment when someone who watched you disappear finally admits they saw you all along. No fireworks, no justice parade, just the quiet shift of truth being returned to the person it belonged to. New Year's Eve dawned without fanfare. No resolutions, no glitter, just a soft, cold wind weaving through downtown Portland, brushing past my coat collar as I walked slowly down Alder Street. I wasn't heading anywhere in particular. Just moving forward, something I hadn't done freely in a long time. The streets were quieter than usual, most people inside preparing for the night's festivities. I passed Sterling Pacific's glass building on my left. The sun caught its surface just right, making the whole thing glow for a moment. Briefly beautiful, briefly blinding. I didn't stop. I didn't look up. That building didn't carry my name anymore, not because it was erased, because I had let it go. A few blocks later, I came across a small pop-up gallery. The sign read, "Voices We Almost Lost." The door was open, and I felt drawn in, not by the name, but by a sense of something unfinished tugging at me. Inside, soft instrumental music played under low-hanging lights. The room was lined with portraits and placards, each one accompanied by a short caption, tributes to unsung community builders, educators, caregivers, faces that had shaped corners of this city in quiet, tireless ways. And then, at the very end of the row, tucked near the floor at a child's eye level, I saw it. My photo. It wasn't from a press kit. It wasn't edited. It was a candid shot, me sitting on a park bench, journal in lap, brows drawn in thought. Below it, in a child's handwriting, was the caption, "My Aunt Esme taught me to speak without shouting." I didn't cry, but my knees almost gave out. I crouched next to the frame, one hand on the floor for balance, the other covering my mouth. I knew the handwriting instantly. Ivy, my niece. The only person in my family who had ever truly listened when I wasn't speaking. She had seen me, not just the woman who brought pie to Thanksgiving or nodded through Callista's monologues. She saw the woman beneath all of that, the one who fought not by raising her voice, but by refusing to vanish. I stayed in that position longer than I should have, breathing deeply, blinking away the sting. By early afternoon, I was back at home. I stepped onto my porch with a small watering can and gently tended to the lavender I'd managed to keep alive despite the cold. My phone buzzed just as I was finishing. Margot's name lit up the screen. "You're not going to believe this," she said, without even saying hello. "We got a request from a group in New Jersey. They want to build something like what we did here. Same model, same structure. They want to license our process." I smiled, soft and genuine. "Let's talk Monday," I told her. "Happy New Year, Esme." "You too." After we hung up, I leaned against the railing and let the quiet settle in. It wasn't empty, it was earned. Later that evening, after a light dinner and a glass of wine, I walked back into my office. The lamp cast a soft glow over my desk. I stood in front of the mirror on the far wall, the one that had watched me cry, doubt, plan, and rise. The original sticky note still held its place. What if I'm right on time? I reached for the pad and wrote a new one, pressing it gently beneath the first. You were. I didn't need fireworks or champagne. I didn't need anyone to call and congratulate me. The world didn't shift dramatically. It never does. But something had moved inside me, permanently. They erased my name. I wrote it back. And that was enough. Sometimes the loudest victories come in silence. Esme didn't need revenge that screamed. She needed truth that echoed. She didn't just reclaim a title or a chair at the table. She reclaimed her worth. Have you ever been erased so quietly that even you started to question your place? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. Your next chapter might be one we tell next.